So this last March, I was having some feelings of overwhelm and burnout in my work, probably for the first time in 10 years. Now, the more I reflected and the more coaching on this challenge that I was facing, I started to become aware that it wasn't the work itself that was burning me out. It was the fact that I had said yes to way too many things. I had said yes to way too many good opportunities, from writing the book to writing articles to podcasting, coaching coaches, keynote speaking around the world, serving as a performance coach for 3 teams in Ireland, helping out with my kids' teams, all 3 of their teams, and a coaching officer role that I had taken on within their club. And when I think about all these opportunities, each of them excites me. They excite me. I look forward to them, but altogether, it becomes too much. So I knew I needed to start quitting some of these good things. As I write in the book, The Culture Captain, you need to say no to good so you can say yes to great. And that's something that I've had to be a lot more intentional about, and which made this conversation I've had with the author, Lindsay Crouse, the author of The Case for Quitting, The Surprising Benefits of Opting Out, a really timely conversation for me. And it is honestly a lot of the work that I do with some of the coaches that I coach. So this is probably going to be a timely listen for a lot of people that listen to this podcast. Lindsay Crouse is the former senior editor at the New York Times, an Emmy-nominated producer. And in her new book, The Case for Quitting, which I absolutely love, she makes a rigorous, research-backed case for the one move our culture, in particular sports culture, refuses to celebrate: giving up, quitting. And when she draws on behavioral economics, she draws on neuroscience and psychology, along with a lot of great stories from business, sports, and everyday life. And she really challenges this myth that perseverance is always a virtue. Perseverance and grit is always the way to go. And she offers us actually a really clear framework for knowing when to push harder and when walking away is the smarter thing to do. This book, The Case for Quitting, it's quickly become one of my favorite books of all time, or at least most impactful on me. And this conversation was also really, really important for me. And I know it's going to be important for other coaches and athletes out there, as this is a really important and hot topic for all of us. So I know you're going to get a lot out of the next 2 episodes of the Coaching Culture Podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is JP Nurbin. I'm an executive coach and facilitator. I work with leaders and teams who are striving for high performance. And I started this podcast in 2017 to help others and myself grow as a leader and build a better team culture. Since 2017, I've also had a newsletter. And every week in that newsletter, there are the notes to that week's episode, a short article for myself, and now lately, I've been including a weekly culture building tool, a resource that resides in TOC Coach. So if you're a subscriber to the newsletter, you get the notes, you get the article, and you get this culture building tool. Also, I just mentioned TOC Coach. That is our online community for coaches. You can learn more about that at tocculture.com. It is a community discussion board where coaches are highly active and engaging, and we're working to answer questions and share ideas there daily, as well as we have all my online courses around sports parents, playing time, the culture system certification course, right? The competitive cauldron, those all rest in the community, as well as all those coaching resource tools, the whole library that we have built up over the last 10 years. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check it out at tocculture.com. We'd love to see you in there. Enough about that. Let's jump into my conversation with Lindsay. Lindsay, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, I've just been really, really loving The Case for Quitting. This is a phenomenal book that is not typically something that people in sports would love, right? I mean, in many ways, I think quit is like the worst 4-letter word you could use in sports, right? Like nobody wants to talk about quitting. They only talk about grit and perseverance and pushing through. But it's obviously very, very important to you and personal to you. And you've got some incredible examples of athletes, and I know it's in a book for athletes particularly, or people in sports. But tell us a little bit about why you wrote this book.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think this book really is for kind of the consummate striver, somebody who does keep going, someone who is able to keep going, someone whose very persona is based around never quitting. I know for myself, that's been the case for most of my life. Growing up, I studied incredibly hard. If I wasn't studying really hard, I was playing sports to the kind of extent that I could possibly achieve. I think for me, perseverance and achievement were intrinsically intertwined in this way that they often are. I mean, especially, I think you have to achieve in order to be able to ask the questions of when it might be time to stop. Then I came to the New York Times. I had 15 years there, and most of my reporting there and work there generally, it explored these same questions around how to keep going, how to go harder, how to do more. I think it was because of these behaviors influencing my own life, and kind of feeling like some of this kind of endless striving was catching up with me. And I started to wonder, why am I doing this? Where is this getting me? Like, why am I doing this? I finally decided to ask the opposite question for this book, which was, when and why might it be better to stop? And in doing so, I really surprised myself. I learned a lot. I mean, I think it's fair to say that writing this book changed my life. I mean, obviously, other parts of my life were changing at the same time. I had 2 children. I was going through career shifts at work. I was kind of coming in and out and rediscovering athleticism, as one often does as they enter their 40s. But in talking to so many people, I mean, experts, but also kind of more ordinary people that I really related to in every sense, people that really believed in striving and believed in doing good work and believed in trying hard. I mean, they really taught me that quitting is not simply a failure of resolve or an easy way out. Often it's a courageous first step to something better. It can be a pivot. It could be a break. And as a lot of people found, I mean, athletes, professionals, parents, even people kind of looking to reinvigorate their romantic lives, they found that quitting is often a chance to come back better, to go further, but not only in their regular lives, but in their most closely held goals. So it was really a fascinating and, to me, counterintuitively, a very inspiring book to write.
Yeah, it really is. I haven't been able to put it down. You talk about perseverance, equating that with achievement, right? This pushing through, this driving is something that was really important to you. It's something you've learned through your upbringing, and you've kind of almost had to unlearn that. But where does that come from for you, this perseverance achievement? Does it come more from your academic experience, or would you say that you could tie it back to some specific sport experiences that have really reinforced that belief?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I wrote about this a lot at the Times. Like I wrote an essay at one point that was about the Boston Marathon and how women, when there was a really, really terrible weather Boston Marathon in 2018. And um, as I was watching it, I just had this feeling that women were going to finish. They weren't necessarily going to do their best, but they were going to finish. And that alone, we were going to equate to success. And I wound up writing about why that would be, partly because I wanted to understand that for myself. I had never dropped out of a race, to my knowledge, or at least in my memory. I really prided myself on finishing anything, any task, any project. So this could be a race, this could be a sport. And again, finishing to me was the same thing as success. As I got older, I started to wonder if that was really true. I mean, I thought back to a race that I did when I was a freshman in college, and I was really struggling. I think in hindsight, I didn't understand that, especially for girls, an athletic trajectory can be a little bit more of a zigzag, and waver than the trajectory that I'd been kind of trained or educated to believe that it would. And I really thought that I was just done athletically. But I was still determined to finish. And so I ran a mile race down in Houston with my team, and I was already slow. I was miserable. And I got on the track. I developed uh, some sort of syndrome that made my shins swell up, like as I started to
Mm.
run, but I made myself finish. I kept falling back and I falling back and away from the rest of the pack. And I was like, no matter what, just keep going. Do not quit. And I wound up falling down at the finish line and, scraping myself up. Like the officials just kind of looked at me and they're like, are you okay? And then like moved on to the next race. And for years, I was so proud of that moment because I did not quit. And as time went on, I just started to wonder, like, why? Like, what was the point of that? I mean, I was bleeding at the end. I was in extreme pain. And for all I know, I mean, you can never go back and second guess what might have been. But I think the worst part is that I'm forcing myself to get back on the track and to push through this pain to very little athletic outcome. I think I was postponing the reset that I inevitably needed in order to come back and actually be the athlete that I wanted to be. And so I think it was like looking back on these little decisions that I made not to quit when I was younger and about how I was confusing that very impulse to kind of continue to exist in this or almost like survive this war of attrition, but I wasn't winning it. But I was telling myself that by kind of staying in the game, that was the same as success. And I don't believe that that's true necessarily, especially if you're not enjoying it. And especially if persevering itself is standing in the way of your performance.
I really resonate with your story. I've run one road marathon, one trail marathon, and then 5 ultra marathons. My biggest ultra was 200 kilometers, and I was determined to finish, to persevere. It was never a doubt in my mind because that becomes so much not quitting became such a part of my identity. To this day, it's my most proud athletic accomplishment or achievement that I have is the perseverance of completing that 200-kilometer run. And yet, if I look at my earlier years, I was a basketball player. So maybe this will give you some interesting thing. I'd be curious your insight. Played basketball, loved basketball, wanted to play professional basketball, wanted to play college Division I. That was the dream. Ever since my earliest memories were being out there in the yard, dreaming, being at that level. And yet I got to high school and I hated basketball. I hated it. But I persevered. I pushed through. I walked on at the University of South Carolina. And while I appreciate the experience, I would say, looking back on it, like the braver thing, the more courageous thing would have been to quit, but I persevered. So why, help me understand, why would the braver thing been to quit, and I could have been proud of me quitting basketball, but yet I look at this ultra marathon and pushing through it. That's something I'm proud of to this day. And I don't think that I would change the perseverance. Like, how do we know the difference between persevering is the good thing, right? The thing that they're going to make a good movie about. And it's actually the bad thing that's actually being destructive in my life.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think there are a lot of different ways to look at that. I mean, one is to think about why are you continuing here? I mean, I have the exact same story from growing up when it comes to the clarinet. Like, it's really, really bad at the clarinet. I mean, and I hated the clarinet, and I would still make myself go to class every morning. And I think it was like in my homeroom and play this clarinet. And I just kept telling myself that if I keep practicing, I'll get better. And that's often true if you enjoy something, or you just intrinsically enjoy it and it doesn't matter what your performance is like. But I think in this case, what I was missing with the clarinet and what you might have been missing with basketball is thinking about if there's very little intrinsic value to continue to do this, what other opportunities are you missing by continuing to invest in this thing that's in front of you? I think it's really important to remember that staying on the default course is a choice as well. And our brain often doesn't want to make that choice or recognize it as such. It's much more comfortable for our brains to continue going on what it already knows. And our brains prefer not to decide. Our brains prefer to slide, to continue to go down the path that we're already on. And so it's also very important to think about when you start. I mean, I'll use my clarinet analogy again. I never really liked it. I mean, it's definitely important to explore and to, give something a shot, but you also want to think about, I think it's really important before you start down these paths to give yourself a set deadline for when you're going to actually reassess if you want to continue. Because otherwise, and I think for you, maybe going to college was the right time to assess that and think about, okay, am I going to continue doing what I'm doing, or am I going to decide that I don't want to continue doing this and to try something else? I also think it's important to remember that, or in research shows this, that it's really important. You cannot overestimate the extent that our brains love comfort, and kind of staying in the zone of what they already know. And so I think that's part of why you would have continued playing basketball, because you hadn't yet explored while you were playing basketball. You had no other sport, I imagine. You didn't know what you were going to go replace it with. And I think it's really important to remember that you may not know at the time what you're going to do. You're very scared of regretting leaving this thing that you know. We obviously overweight things that we know over the uncertainty of what we don't know, and want to stay with what we know to almost absurd degrees. But once you left basketball, I imagine you filled that time with something else, presumably something that you learned to like more. So when you decided to actually leave basketball, you may not have known what was next, but you figured it out. And I think it's really important to remember that these risks, they feel like risks at the time, and they are risks at the time. I mean, in some ways, being an adult and growing up is learning to deal with the risk and the discomfort that comes with risk, and the very real possibility that you may wind up regretting the decisions that you made. At the same time, while we often do regret decisions that we make right in the moment, over the long course of our life, there's a lot of research by a Cornell psychologist named Tom Gilovich about how we often regret the ideal road not taken. We regret the risks that we didn't take. We regret not trying, not exploring, not, going after that other sport, not leaving and trying that other job. And that's often, that regret comes from when we know that we've outgrown a path that we're in and we stay anyway.
Hmm.
So you're totally right that you didn't have or you're totally right to have called it courage, because it is courageous to take a risk and to try something else. But we often, at the end of the day, are happy that we did.
Yeah, I don't know if I go back to like, young JP, like part of me is like still believing, I grew up on the movie Rudy, right? Like, that was the story of a guy that just didn't quit, wanted to play football at the University of Notre Dame. Everyone told him he was a fool, told him he was an idiot. He kept going, he kept going. And he gets this one magical play at the end of a game, and it like everything, all that, and he persevered through it all to have
Mhm.
this one moment and this one moment of pride. And yet I remember like looking back at this interview where the real Rudy was being interviewed and asked about his that story. He's like, if he could do it over again, he said, I would absolutely not do it. He was like, it was so much, it cost so much to go through that experience. It really probably wasn't worth it at the end of the day. I think so often it can be, maybe it's for believing, like I think about my young me is like, was I believing in the dream, or was I just worried about what other people would think if I stepped away from it? I think so oftentimes I had this dream of playing at this level and people had invested in that dream and believed in me. My identity wasn't even just a basketball player. My identity was the guy who had this dream. And to give up on that was like, I was afraid of what people would think or what people would say. And I wanted to have that moment where people would say, I'm so proud of you. You did it. You pushed through, you persevered. And that felt at stake in that moment.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think what's so interesting there is that when you're talking about you persevered, it's like, but is persevering when you're not actually achieving the outcome that you want and not necessarily continuing to enjoy the process, is that really worth it? And you have to have an answer to that. Sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes it's because you just really believe that ultimately all this hard work is going to pay off. And I think it's really important to remember that we have real survivor's bias in the stories that we tell around persevering, paying off. We don't gravitate towards the stories of the people who put everything into years and years and years of chasing this goal and all the costs that they incurred to do that, and they still didn't get what we want. We don't tell those stories. And so it's really up to you to be checking as you go about, am I actually getting closer to this goal? The psychologist Adam Alter writes about this in his book Anatomy of a Breakthrough, about how we can one, or he has a strategy for how we can deal with this. I mean, so think back to 5 years ago, 1 year ago, and now. And if success really is your goal here, are you closing, and all of this effort that you're putting in, are you closing that gap between success and failure? Are you getting closer to where you want to be? Are you staying the same? Or are you actually potentially moving further away? And if you're failing right now, but still getting closer to where you want to be, persistence makes sense. You do want to continue going. But if you're moving further and further away from your goal, you really want to think about that. If success is the goal here, if actually making the team, being an amazing player is the goal and you're actually getting further away, quitting isn't just like a risky choice that it feels like. It's the smart choice, and definitely the kind of choice that's going to free you up to pursue to pursue something that actually might succeed. It also might protect you from investing so much effort into something that you do veer into self-sabotage. Quitting is probably not just the easier choice in that way, it's also the wise choice. And I also want to get into what you mentioned there about the fear of judgment from friends and family, because I definitely relate to that. And I think a lot of people do. And it's really important to remember here that we often overweight the extent to which other people around us, our peers, our families, that they're watching and even care about, if we continue to go. I mean, we're usually imagining a spotlight on us that simply isn't there. This is also Tom Gilovich, the Cornell psychologist. He calls it the spotlight effect, where we can often stop much more than we're inclined to believe. Like we just think everyone is watching us and we're kind of waiting for this imaginary permission from them that we don't have. And it's really been there all along. Often the person that is holding us back the most is ourselves, imagining this pressure from others because we don't want to admit that it's actually pressure from ourselves, that we really want to succeed. All of these impulses are often very virtuous. They're very well-meaning. Of course, it's good to want to succeed. Of course, of course it's good to not want to let other people down. Of course, it's good to want to protect ourselves. But that doesn't mean. But those impulses often keep us from making the right choice, which is to opt out when continuing is getting in the way of our very goals themselves.
And what you just shared with me helped me really make this a little bit clearer in my mind, because I was really struggling to understand, okay, how do I know this is like a moment I should persevere and be gritty, or this is a moment I should pull back? But you talk about the goal. And for me, I think about, especially in relation to sports and the coaches that I work with, like we have an ultimate goal. And that is at the end of the day that our sports will help us and our athletes to become more the person that we want to be and to become. And you talk about this in the book about who we're becoming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the being rather than the doing. And I think so much around sports was no longer helping me to become the person I wanted to become when I was playing basketball. But you go, flip forward, nearly 20 years later, 20 years later. And, sports now as a, marathon, ultra running, I did see it as a tool to help me, you know, through the very experience, the joy, the passion, the character building. I did see it as something that was helping move me closer to being the
Mm-hmm.
husband, the father that I wanted to become. I
Yep.
didn't see it as moving me away from that. And I think that maybe that's a good principle for us to operate by.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also think it's really important here to remember that the very impulses that lead us to try something new or even lead us to succeed at it at first, before we start to ask these questions about when we want to leave, the harder questions about leaving, when we've already invested a lot, when we're thinking about really leaving something on the table early, when it still feels too early, but, kind of inside instinctively, we already know it's time. Like that's the hard time to leave. And I think it's important then to remember that we're actually not leaving everything behind. And often the very traits that led us to succeed at what we were doing in those moments, those don't go away. They stay with us. The psychoanalyst Eric Fromm, he argued in the 1970s that most of us define ourselves by what we have, by the things that we do, whether it's our job or our sport, our money, our wealth, like our things. And he called this a having orientation. Obviously, there are a lot of reasons why you might not want to do that. You can lose them. It's also very hard to think about walking away from them. As you said, we intertwine our identities with these things. But the other way to think of ourselves is by what he called being traits. These are our values. So our kindness, our perseverance, our passion, our ability to work hard. And when we think about things this way, we can actually change what we apply those traits to, right? So we could apply it to football, we could apply it to basketball, we could apply it to our work, our jobs. You could apply it to doing a podcast. But then when you actually know that it's time to leave, you can get a little bit more confidence in remembering that you're not leaving everything on the table. Those being qualities are going to come with you somewhere else, and you can apply them to your next pursuit, and hopefully have the same and perhaps a more successful experience applying them to something where you do have this fresh start. So you're rarely leaving everything behind. You just don't often know how they're going to apply to what you're doing next. And, the jigsaw puzzles pieces kind of show how they fit together in hindsight.
It almost feels like the perseverance, this not quitting, can become almost a bad habit for some of us. Because you talked about even identity, about who we be, and one of the words you use is perseverance. And like, I associate myself as I never quit. I never quit anything. Like we hear people in sports talk about this, which is really interesting because, you think about the two of the most popular personal development books probably in the last decade, Grit by Angela Duckworth and Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is, which is, I was actually thinking about before we got on here today, it's just like Atomic Habits is about how to build good habits and break bad ones. But like, I don't know, I just like, but is never quitting, like this perseverance, is this type of trait in this, like, is this potentially a bad habit of ours? And I feel like it can be, right?
Yeah. And I love both of those books. And I think this is where a book about quitting is for the kind of person like me who will over apply those impulses. And like, I will die trying. And I'm really proud of that. I don't always think of myself as someone who comes to the table with boundless talent. I come with effort. I come with enthusiasm. I come with a willingness to really put up with a lot of adversity in order to see my goals through. But I think so. And again, I am the kind of person that just trusts that my hard work will pay off. Also, the past has shown me that it often does. And I think that's also really important. There are studies on zebrafish, these little blue fish that scientists can manipulate their genes, and they've learned a lot about the science of futility and understanding when to persevere and when to quit from these zebrafish, because they can actually see through their brains and watch the impulses that are driving the decisions that they make as they do it. And I thought it was really interesting to learn from the scientist Misha Arens that zebrafish who have been conditioned to learn that their hard work succeeds in the past will persist at any task that is been determined by scientists to be futile. There's no way they can succeed. There's no way they can swim forward. They will just swim and swim and swim harder against a current that is actually taking them backwards for much longer than is wise, right? When the other choice is to conserve your energy for when this current goes away, and you might actually be able to swim to a place where you'll survive. So I think it's important to remember that if we have taught ourselves that we are the kinds of people where our perseverance will pay off, it actually can blind us to recognizing when our perseverance is no longer succeeding, and can actually lead us down a worse path, or a path that is taking too much energy from us. It can blind us to the fact that we are failing, or that we are sabotaging ourselves, because we just trust so hard that our hard work will pay off. And it may. It absolutely might. Again, like for every person that has put up with all the odds, like it worked for them, but it may not work for us in every context. And the more we succeed, the more we are actually less likely to recognize those losing scenarios. And I thought that was very important for myself, especially like as I started to work harder and harder at at my own job, I started to realize that I could not disaggregate working hard, like, genuine hard work, the work that I grew up embracing, that I really embraced in my own career to do things that I was incredibly proud of. I could not disaggregate the idea of hard work from working pointlessly hard. And
Mm,
that's something that you really have to teach yourself again if you're used to hard work always getting the return that you see.
mm. That's really hard for coaches, really
Yes.
hard for athletes. Like coaches want to watch more film. They want to keep going. Like they just have to fill up their days. There's almost, working these sleepless nights. There's the stories of coaches sleeping in the office, and that becomes the badge of honor. And
Yes.
putting in those times is like and there is no doubt about it that you have to work really hard if you want to be successful in the world of sports, right?
Yep.
And yet, to your point, but we have a hard time going, okay, when do I shut it down, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think so. I am transfixed with this idea, especially as it comes to athletes, because I've always thought for myself that my mind will lie to me. It will lie about how much I can take. I will do the stay up all night, almost as a test of my own grit and ability to put up with things. Like I can find that to be really, really motivating, I guess, to just kind of like explore my limits and see what I can do. But again, my mind will lie about how much I take, and my body tells the truth. And I think a lot of
Mm,
athletes find this out. The best athletes often are true experts at coming up to that line, but they don't cross it. And I think that's what the rest of us really need to learn is how to back off, how to push ourselves to the absolute extent of our of our potential, but to back off before we flip and our strengths become our weaknesses and we fall apart. Almost like Icarus, like flying towards the sun, then he falls back down, right? And
Let me just
yeah,
just jump in on that because I think that
yeah,
is so important. When you just the best athletes are really good at this, and I look at you tell the story in the book of Roger Bannister and how it was actually the thing that broke him, helped him get across the 4 minute mile was actually resting, taking time away from the sport. You look at the ultra runner, Courtney Dauwalter, you talked about the
uh-huh,
body being the best indicator. She doesn't have training plans. She doesn't follow a schedule. She doesn't have a coach telling her XYZ, you got to run all these miles. She literally listens to her body. You look at
yep,
Tom Brady, one of the greatest athletes of all time, the greatest football player of all time, and some people will say, oh, well, he persevered. He persevered until he was in his 40s as an athlete. He became a master at recovery. Like
yep,
almost all of his focus and effort was on how to recover, how to
yep.
sleep, how to hydrate, how to get nutrition, how to turn off, so that you can come back fully charged. It was at the point of like stopping or quitting doing and just the work and focusing on the doing of recovery, right? Like this is really important.
Yeah. And I think it's important to really be clear about what we mean here by recovery. And I think there are two things.
Mm,
I think extreme work will often trigger extreme reactions. The kind of rest that actually isn't really good for us, like that sort of bed rotting mentality where you're so depleted that you just kind of like lie in your bed and you're not even sleeping. You're just scrolling through your phone. That is not the right way to rest necessarily. That is often going to
mhm,
just deplete you even more. That will trigger a feedback loop in your brain where, I mean, when people kind of joke about becoming a vegetable, like that is what's happening there. Like you are not feeling any sort of motivation to truly recharge and to re-energize. You're just getting more and more sluggish. And that is not the goal there. What you do want to do is the kind of rest that really recharges you and makes you come alive. Another word for this is leisure. Now, what is leisure? It's the kind of work that we do when we're not truly working. It's that flow state. It's fun. It's the kind of thing where we just really feel alive. And I think the Bannister story that's in the book that you brought up is a really good example of that, and really kind of showed me what this kind of very regenerative, like leisure-oriented rest can achieve. So in the spring of 1954, Bannister and a number of other people were all trying to break the world record in the mile. They were trying to get below 4 minutes. And they were all getting really tired. They were obviously like, these are the best athletes in the world. They were training really, really hard. And he found, as I have found many times in my life, and I imagine you have, and a lot of the other strivers listening have as well, that the grind stopped working. You plateau and then you actually start to get slower, and just have no motivation to keep getting back at the work that you need to do in order to achieve this goal. And so what he did is very counterintuitive to what a lot of us goal-oriented people would do. He stopped. He didn't even run at all. He instead went to Scotland with his training partner, and they spent their days not, languishing, but rather climbing mountains, scrambling up rocks, like doing all the kinds of fun things that a very, very like mission-oriented work ethic would not allow for. They basically went on vacation. And so it's like this is like an extremely ambitious person at the height of trying to achieve one of his like most closely held goals, and he has stopped. So for 3 days he didn't run at all. And again, he wasn't injured. It wasn't that he trained so hard that he couldn't function anymore. He actually pulled back before he hit the brink. I'm obsessed with this idea of our strengths being our weaknesses, and that our strengths to persevere can flip into the kind of behavior that becomes, again, like that kind of working pointlessly hard mentality. And he didn't do that. And so then he came back from Scotland and he was totally re-energized. He was using rest not as a reaction, but rather as a tool, an expression of discipline, not the absence of it. And then when he came back, he had a training breakthrough and he was confident. Most importantly, he was happy. He was ready to go. I cannot understate the importance of momentum and confidence when it comes to trying to achieve our goals. And often rest in this much more restorative, fun way is the missing ingredient there, and the magic ingredient. And right after he came back, he finally broke that barrier. It was the perfect mile. And I thought for me, that was one of the most compelling examples of why stopping, kind of recharging, restoring ourselves, we can tell ourselves that it's laziness. We can tell ourselves that it's indiscipline, but really sometimes it is the absolute key to not just enjoying ourselves again and feeling good about what we're doing, but to actually propel ourselves over the hump that we're looking at, and to achieve our greatest goals.
All right, that's it for the first part of my conversation with Lindsay. Next week, we're going to be really talking about, okay, hey, maybe you need to make this move, you make this quit. Okay, how do you do that? And how do you do that well? So really important conversation next week. I know you're going to want to check it out, so be sure to subscribe to the podcast. If you found today's episode valuable, please be sure to share it. Super grateful for Lindsay coming on the podcast and just sharing more, diving deeper here, especially from a sports perspective. So thank you again for listening to the podcast, and looking forward to sharing with you next week.